Hi, and welcome back to another session of Addiction and the Three Principles. My name is Greg Suki here with Harry Durbitsky, and we have our guest today is Barbara Smith. Today we're going to be talking about kind of bridging the gap between 12-step programs and the three principles. The intention of this is definitely not to put down any other approach to recovery. There is definitely value in all of it. I personally, I spent a few years in AA, and I'm really grateful for the time that I spent in there. And so I hope we can keep this conversation very civilized today and useful and helpful for people. So today, like I said, I asked Barbara Smith to join us. I actually just talked to her for the first time earlier this week, and I love her approach to talking about just, like I said, that bridging the gap between the 12-step programs and three principles, because there are a lot of similarities. You know, there's ways that they all kind of coincide. Barbara is she's an MSW, a clinical social worker. She's worked in a lot of different areas over the past 40 years. Or for the past 30 years or so, she's been mainly in the field of addictions, which is great. She has a lot of experience in it. She was introduced to the three principles about 3 years ago, and this is her only, it's the preferred and only approach that she uses, and it transformed not only her practice but also her personal life as well. And she'll share some of that with us as well today. She really has a good story about this, but she really loves working with people with addictions. It's obviously there's a huge need for it, but there's also there's something different about working with somebody who's trying to recover from addictions. There's a lot of there's just a lot of gratitude and appreciation for what people are willing to offer for help. And she has like I said before, she has a really good understanding on helping people kind of bridge that gap between 12 steps and three principles. And do you want to say anything before she gets started, Harry?
I do want to say a few things. One of the things I was really looking forward to today, because it's one of the topics that I actually, in my own head, am a little fuzzy about. And to be honest, I wasn't ready for this particular discussion, let's say in 4 or 5 months ago, because I was very anti-AA. But I've started to hear people talk about how much they got out of AA or 12 steps. And I've also realized that this is an area that it's good that I don't know, and I'm hoping I'll be able to learn something from everybody. It's not certainly my area of strength. And yesterday I went to a native sweat, and it was very interesting because they brought in 7 people from the 12-step program into the sweat. And what was noticeable was that how easy they stepped into it, and how easy they got into the feelings, the spiritual feelings, and accepting what was happening. So if they could do it in a sweat, obviously the thought popped in my head, why should it be any different than the three principles if we introduce it from I guess the answer is a spiritual perspective. And so I was impressed with not only what they received in the sweat, but also the fact that they were so open to receiving something. And I also very much enjoyed talking to Barbara and her thing. So I'm going to just pass it over to her now. Go ahead, Barb.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you both for having me. I'm really pleased to be a part of this conversation today. And I commend you for the work that you're doing. I think it's invaluable to have this kind of forum online and accessible to people, because I refer a lot of my clients to it, and it's been tremendous. And I just wanted to share with you, Greg, that I've had some insights of my own as a result of your sharing. I found some of your comments about forgiveness particularly enlightening, and I really was impacted when I saw what you shared from your research on through the archives of AA about Bill Wilson's quote about the evolution of thought. I thought that was fascinating. I'd never seen that before, but of course that's really what we're here to talk about. That one of the implications of seeing the three principles understanding is that we are in a constantly evolving understanding of the world around us, that's in fact what consciousness is. And as we grow in our understanding and we see things differently, we bring more and more things into focus. And so at any time in history when we see things in a new way, when there is in fact a shift in understanding of something, whether it's that the earth is flat or that what causes disease or whatever, there's an inevitable pushback. I'm dealing with a chronic illness now, and there's an inevitable pushback on the understanding of bacteria and how that has evolved. People are still working with age-old, well, at least 60-year-old antibiotics to treat bacterium that have evolved tremendously and continue to evolve moment by moment. So understanding that at the foundation of what we're talking about is the nature of thought, which is always evolving, is really critical. But I really like, and I work a lot with Schopenhauer's quote that says, truth goes through three phases. First, it's violently opposed. Secondly, it's ridiculed. And thirdly, it's accepted as self-evident. And so I hope that we're getting to the point in life where, at least at this point in the field of addictions, for where I sit, what we've been doing hasn't worked very well. We have a huge recidivism rate. I know you guys have talked about that a lot on this program. The local treatment center around here has what they fondly refer to as a spin dry cycle. People are coming in and out of treatment all the time. We have more drugs, more diagnoses, more treatment centers, more problems, and it's not working. We've got more problems with addiction and more problems with mental illness than we've really ever had before. So I think this understanding is something whose time has come, and I think hopefully people are willing to open up to hear something new. So I guess where I want to start, and I don't want to take a lot of time today because I really want to hear what other people have to say, but where I wanted to just start was to really point to the fact that both Bill Wilson and Sydney Banks had enlightenment experiences. They had profound, white light, divine experience that changed their lives and changed the way they saw the world. And they were, I think Bill Wilson was searching his whole life for how to describe that, for how to explain this shift in consciousness that happened to him, to try to put something that was extraordinarily beyond the human experience into words in a way that would help other people. I think he devoted his whole life to doing that and to understanding that. And many of you may know that he even dropped acid in the effort to try to see if that would help. So I think if Bill Wilson were alive today, he would be really all over this understanding, because I think it explains so much. And I think also Sydney Banks was looking his whole life after his experience to find ways to explain what had happened. And he talked about the form and the pre-form. And the first thing that really struck me in any of his readings was in the missing link, when he said that all wisdom is tainted by human thought. So these were two ordinary human men trying the best they could to describe a divine experience. And, Sid always talked about it being beyond words, beyond the way we see it. So I think that's that's one of the foundational pieces that I think we need to really start from, which is that, again, these were ordinary men, ordinary humans who had an extraordinary divine experience, and then spent their lives finding ways and encouraging people to find ways to point towards it. So given that, let me just tell you a little bit about myself and about the work that I used to do. Like Greg said, I've been in the field of addictions for over 30 years. And I have seen many, many people, thousands of addicts over that period of time. And I've known many, many people, many of my close friends, many people in my life who have been in 12-step recovery and got tremendous help from 12-step recovery. They're really grounded and rooted in 12-step recovery. And my former boss, who was a psychiatrist, used to always say that he would say to new patients, it was a very lucky person who was able to get AA. So I just want people to hear that I really am a great proponent of what AA has offered to so many people and has been so helpful. And that is a bias that I have. However, in my work, I also had a private practice on the side where people would send me the tough ones, the ones who didn't get what they needed, the chronic relapsers, the people who were really struggling. And in my practice, I found that there were, in my total experience, I found that there were lots of people who got great things from AA and found stable sobriety and stayed with it the rest of their lives. But then I found a lot of people, and these were the people who were really referred to me, who did not connect, did not resonate with 12 steps. And in fact, they were highly resistant. And so they would come to me and I would try to bridge the gap to try to help them hear the wisdom. And then, as AA says, take what you like and leave the rest. Because I think there's so much wisdom in AA. And I want to talk about that in a few minutes. But we really want to just point to these things that I think that are really good, and really then point to perhaps some of the things that have evolved, that our understanding has evolved. So I would see these people who got AA, I would see these people who didn't get AA, I would see people who had an experience perhaps even when they were a teenager or in college where they realized, on their own, I can't do this stuff anymore, and for the rest of their lives they would be sober. They'd never touch another drink. That was before they ever walked through the door of an AA meeting. So there are all kinds of people who got sobriety, whether or not they ever stepped through the door of AA. And so I never really thought much about that other than, I guess one size doesn't fit all. But when I learned the principles, I really started to get it. I started to get what was sort of the common denominator of all of these people's experiences. And so, I guess what I want to talk about today are what are some of the links, some of the things that work well. Where the common ground is between the two programs. It's not, I don't see the three principles as a program, but the program of AA and the understanding of the three principles. And what are some of the places that it diverges. So, and then I'm going to stop and let people talk and ask any questions they might have. But so let's start with a common ground. I think for me, much of the wisdom in the 12 steps comes in the form of the slogans. So as I was thinking about this talk, I started reflecting on some of my favorite of the AA slogans. And the first one that I think is such a common denominator is keep it simple. We can, as human beings, make things extraordinarily complex. I've worked with a lot of addicts who think that addicts have a corner on that market, but I can guarantee you it is not a corner on that market. And so keeping it simple in the whole three principles understanding is that there is a very simple unifying truth, a logic to the human psychological condition, that when we understand how it works, all the complexity just kind of dissipates and disappears, which is extraordinary. It clears people's minds. It gives people the focus that they need to get on about their life and handle life on life's terms. So I think keeping it simple, there's that wisdom is a thread that runs through both. The other two the others that I think I saw, that I reflected on, one day at a time, and this too shall pass, are both speaking to what we're talking about in the principles as the transient nature of thought. That thought, it does pass. This too shall pass is posted all over my house, all over my office. I've always loved that statement. But when I really got the principles, when I really understood how it works, all of a sudden it was like, this too shall pass, because it does pass. It does. Oh, now I get it. Now I understand why this is so powerful, why this is so true. And the other one is that, obviously both are firmly aligned with the spiritual, that let go and let God. This is bigger than us. It's bigger than our small personal mind, personal psychology. It's a much bigger truth that's way beyond us. So I think those are the three very, very profound things. And again, I'd be really interested in hearing the things that other people see. And of course, the last one for me, and this was just reminded me when Greg was talking, the big thing of both of them is gratitude. Gratitude. I love Keith Blevins. I heard him make a statement a few months ago in a talk that he gave that said, when our minds are cleared, what becomes clear to us in that moment, in the present moment, is gratitude. We really are able to see ourselves and the world around us in a way where the colors almost become brighter. It's just an extraordinary experience of almost luminescence of being in this moment and seeing ourselves within the context of the world with tremendous gratitude and appreciation. So those are the ones that I see are the most, that stand out the most to me. And then I just very briefly want to touch on the divergence of these two. I think the greatest difference, clearly, is that we're talking sort of apples and oranges. The 12 steps, I believe, were Bill Wilson's effort through his human experience to try to put words to and try to find help for addicts who are suffering. And so in the 12 step, in the big book, it says, as a result of these steps, we had an insight. Okay, so he gave us this list of doings to perform, in order to be able to hopefully then see, truth, to be able to explain and to have an insight that would bring about this sense of peace and this sense of gratitude, this shift in consciousness. However, if that were true, if that were actually happened, then everybody who went to AA and did the steps would have it, and they don't. But then why, again, here's where my experience came into focus. People who never went to AA and had it, oh, well, then I guess it wasn't the steps. The steps could be a helpful tool to get there, but that's not how it happens. In the principles, what we understand is that insight, and my work, my website and my business are called Gifts of Insight. Insight is this transformative power that is coming to us through a much higher power. It's coming to us via universal mind. And that is always flowing. It's always out there. You don't have to do steps. I mean, I've known people who have done the steps over and over and over and are still some of the most unhappy, unstable, miserable human beings. And I've known people who've never done the steps, again, who have had it. So that's the way I see it. That's the biggest divergent. We're talking really two different paradigms. One is a paradigm of doing something to get this, and another that explains the human condition, explains how it works, that doesn't require any doing on our part. It's a gift. It's always flowing through us. And we can tap into that in any moment. So that's all I have to say, and I'd love to hear what other people have to share.
Thank you, Barbara. And just so everybody knows, if you didn't get to, if you didn't see that post that she referred to, Bill Wilson's quote that I put up there, he said, even good principles can sometimes be displaced by the discovery of still better ones. Only God is unchanging. And that was from, I got that a couple years ago. I'm pretty sure it was from the book, Language of the Heart, which is a bunch of letters that he wrote. And I actually spent some time in the AA archives and read a lot of his letters that were never printed. And Bill Wilson was a huge proponent of the evolution of the program of AA. And that is why in the big book that he put the steps as being suggested, and he put honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness as being indispensable. Because he didn't want people to get stuck on just the steps. Yes, they work for some people, but it was his best guess at how to help somebody else have the same experience that he had. You know, and I had an experience myself back in 2012, and I still really have no clue how to tell somebody to have it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that's so beyond words that it just does not cover it. And Bill Wilson realized that. And one thing that he actually really encouraged was for different AA groups to really practice autonomy and run their meetings their own way, regardless of whether they believed in anything, any of the tenets or principles of AA. And the reason he did that, he said, is one of two things is going to happen. Either one, they're going to fail and be forced to adopt AA's principles anyway, or they'll succeed and AA should adopt their principles. So Bill Wilson was really huge on evolution. He didn't want the program to get stuck in one spot, which unfortunately I think is what has happened, because the steps do work for some. And there are some people who, you know, you'll run into in the fellowship of AA, and they really, I mean, their lives really turned around. They're happy, they're fulfilled people. You know, the whole experience worked for them. So then people start to think that, well, if it worked for them, it must be able to work for everybody. But like Barbara said, there's a lot of people who've been through the steps over and over and over again, and it just doesn't speak to them. And part of the beauty that I love about the three principles is the fact that there is no one approach to explaining these. There's nobody saying you have to talk about the three principles in this way. Everybody talks about them in their own way, how they've experienced it. And some people will connect with that, and some people won't. You know, it's not like every single person I talk to about the three principles suddenly becomes sober and happy and joyous and all of that. You know, it may take them talking to somebody else and hearing a different viewpoint on it. We all have a different camera angle. You know, we're describing the same thing, but we're just doing it from a slightly different angle. And that, to me, that's the beauty of it.
Greg, one of the things that was interesting, when Sid talked about the subject, he never mentioned the subject. And that is also an interesting difference, is that we're not actually talking about addiction. We're talking about the spiritual nature of the three principles. And when he gave a talk on thought and alcoholism, he actually never mentioned it, and somebody got quite disturbed and says, well, shouldn't they get off the drinking or the drug use? And he says, well, of course. But he never actually ever dealt with the subject. And I think within that context, we're actually much more comfortable talking about the nature of the principles than we are about the field of addiction and its application. You two guys are really good at that, by the way. You know, I put you two at a very high level of being able to do that, but very few people are able to talk about the spiritual nature, or the true nature of the principle, spiritual and psychological. And so let's hear some other people now, Greg. I think it's a good time to
Yeah, I was just
roll
about to
into
say, I have people muted, just keep down on background noise. So please feel free to either unmute yourself, or in the participants tab, there's a raise hand feature, and then we'll call on you and get you in. And remember, I'm not on gallery view, so I can't see anybody if you get.
Chris has raised his hand.
I was trying to give someone else a chance to talk, but whatever, I used the opportunity. Forgive me, I just got to the meeting about 5 minutes ago. I have a class till 2 o'clock, so I'll be talking somewhat out of context and maybe ill-informed or whatever. But a lot of this conversation along addiction is something I've been bringing up at different webinars and conversations and texting and posts on Facebook. And I probably a large part of the conversation I'm having is my own personal struggle, ways to, having been someone who's gone to 12-step meetings for 6 years and been clean and sober for 6 years, and someone that's been involved in the 3 principles for 3 or 4 years, and it's just really been the last couple of years, my understanding of the principles has really sunk in, I think. Some days I don't know anything for sure, it seems like. So like part of it is, well, whatever. Like one of the things that stirred up a lot of my thinking was when I've heard some very prominent 3 principles people say how, in a public forum, how, it's like ridiculous to call yourself an addict or an alcoholic just because you've had a problem with drinking or alcohol. And I'm thinking, first of all, so I can't control or monitor what other people say. So it's my own little, I don't know, hopefully something good comes from it, my own little struggle with my own thinking on the subject. Because I feel like, well, if I would love more people to understand, to be introduced to the 3 principles, and people that are in addiction programs, there's certain things you would say that would probably be more like vinegar than honey. So, but I should only choose my own words and how I present myself and how I present the 3 principles. In some ways, I have more internal conflict when I'm in a 12-step meeting now than I used to as well, because I just don't simply buy into that. How a lot of it isn't the big book, it isn't the 12 steps, it's just a very common culture and common shared beliefs that people share that I just simply don't agree with. So I'm just kind of opening up my heart and my mind to my own confusion and what's going on with me. Although someone in a recent meeting, it was a follow-up meeting on the awesome event for the addiction track. The woman, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name. The woman who does she works at Gulf Breeze, and she's the intake manager or person. And she brought up like how it clicked for me. I can go into a Christian church. Now I grew up Catholic. I can go up into a Christian church and disagree in my heart, with so much of the doctrine, and still go to a Christian church and find peace and be with my family and see the wisdom in the words without the squirrel cages taken off in my head and going around and around about how I see Jesus or God or anything. I'm at perfect peace with it. I'm perfectly grounded with it, but I'm not there fully when it comes to how 3 principles people talk about addiction and how 12-step people talk about addiction. I don't know if what I said makes any sense. That's where I'm at.
It makes a lot of sense.
Well, first of all, I think it's only a natural part of the process for somebody when they've been in a 12-step program and they come across the 3 principles to almost become anti-12-step for a short time. And then, like Barbara was talking about those stages through it, where at first you're kind of like really anti whatever you used to have. And then eventually as you gain a deeper understanding of the 3 principles, you start to see the principles in those programs. What Bill Wilson saw was really the same thing that Sydney Banks saw. They just have very different ways of describing it. But they experienced the same thing. They experienced the essence of life and how we experience it. And that's a beautiful thing. So, the 12-step programs were all started on a very spiritual, true basis at its core. And just like anything else, and even in the 3 principles, you have people who have their own ideas of the 3 principles, and they go off on their own, and they kind of have their own little story going on. That's normal. That's going to happen. And as our understanding of this deepens, that just fades away. And we reach that position of neutrality. And that was another thing that was really big in the core of AA, was talking about reaching that position of neutrality, where we neither fear it nor go after it. It's just, it's non-issue. It's not an issue anymore. So that's another similarity between the two, is that idea of reaching that point of neutrality.
But some of the things, Greg, that you're saying, some people would disagree with. Like, I disagree with that Bill Wilson had the same spiritual insight that Sydney Banks had. Like, that doesn't agree with me. So I immediately, when I hear you say that, I go, no, that's nice. It's a nice point of view, but I don't agree with it. And
I'm not saying he had the same insight. I don't
want to talk about that. I just
he experienced the same source, the same energy in a different way. Right.
Yeah, we all do that. Every human being here is experiencing the same source. But there's, I'm just saying that when we say things about AA and 3P, there is a lot of contentious issues in it, and a lot of clarity that's required to become what I call a worldly view. And that would be one point. I'm just mentioning that. I think in this room, if we went around and asked about that, I know Tom has his own opinions about that, and because from what you've written and so on, everybody would have a different point of view about certain things that we're talking about. And that's actually what makes it kind of a good topic, is that we do disagree with a lot of what 3P and AA are saying.
Chris again. Someone recently posted on Facebook a link. The title was "Addiction is an Illusion," and then had a link to a TEDx talk from this doctor, I want to say in Vancouver, who worked with addicts. And he didn't say one thing I hadn't heard in a 12-step meeting or from a conversation with my sponsor, which was that. And I'm not in a camp. I honestly am not in a camp. I just thought, wow, in fact, wasn't even quite sure where the addiction is an illusion part was revealed itself, like, other than everything's an illusion. But it was so interesting how this, so many, I learned from my first day with a sponsor that, they reference with addiction as a disease, which is, I never believed it was a disease. I always thought that was a good way of not beating yourself up as much. But But so in the conversation, how's it went? This is a disease. The symptom is addiction and drinking and drugs, but it's not. It's a symptom of a bigger picture of what's going on with the person. The alcohol is simply a symptom, or the drug is a symptom of. And when Amy Johnson speaks about, we're taking a perfectly natural approach to trying to ease pain and fix something in us by reaching for an outside substance, it takes the blame. Another approach would be you're a complete loser and an idiot and weak and you're just messed up and that's why you take drugs. But the problem with that approach is we never get away from beating ourselves up, which seems to be a big part of the whole cycle, is completely uncomfortable in the presence of our own thinking, so we try to escape it.
Well, for me, I think it's important to note that there's a big difference between the original AA of the big book and what it's morphed into over time. There's not any mention of it being a disease in the big book. There's so many things that have been added and changed by members, participants over the years that I think I often wish I could have been a part of AA in the 50s or when it did seem to be much more helpful, and there's too many concepts like the disease concept that have caused the problem in the way.
Is that true, Tom? It's true that it was in the big book, it's not mentioned?
Right.
Yeah, they don't call it a disease in there. Now, the disease concept didn't come around until I want to say the early 70s or late 60s or something, I think is when when alcoholism officially became a disease. Now, at that time, though, that was a very good thing because that was a huge step in the evolution of how people look at people having addiction issues. Because before that, they were just looked at as moral lepers. They were just screw-ups, and that was it. So the idea that there could be a disease behind it brought compassion to people who had previously just been outcast. So it was a good thing at the time, but the problem was it should have kept evolving. And it kind of stopped there, and it just said, oh, there's this disease, and then kind of stopped there. And it's really, I view it as nothing more than a habitual thought pattern. And once you break the pattern, you break the addictive habit, and that's been my experience with it.
Well, the counselor I'm working with in Vegas now, he retired, but his first thing was do not label yourself and do not count time. And those are two things that I stopped labeling myself, but I still might, in the back of my mind, I know how long it's been, but it isn't something I ever share or focus on. And I always say, well, what's more important is how close am I to taking another one? It's irrelevant how long it's been since I used, to me.
What do you take on this, Barbara?
Well, I think the whole, the word that is the key word here is concept. The disease model was a concept. And like you said, it was an explanation at that time that really did take away the moral attachments that people had to drinking, to people who struggled with this. And but again, a concept is a concept. We're evolving in our thinking about these concepts all the time. And when we get too locked on it is when I think it's so limiting. So, certainly I was trained in the disease concept, and I, for many, many years, and this is very humbling to admit, but for many, many years, explained the disease concept to people. Well, you do have this disease because it's because it's like diabetes. Yeah, that's it. It's like diabetes. If you don't take care of it, it's going to come back with a vengeance. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because that's what I was told. And so I fed that to people, even though it didn't even really make sense to me, but it was kind of the current wisdom that we were working with. So I think that, again, that disease concept, then we developed this entire framework around that to sort of justify that, of the cognitive, psychological, environmental, the complexities of this horrible disease, and how it's now, I just read an article in the local paper not long ago that it's incurable. Opiate addiction is incurable, well, gosh, I mean, one of the things that I find when I tell people you don't have a disease is that it's kind of like telling somebody you don't have cancer. It takes a whole lot off your mind, and your mind is able to quiet in a way that you can hear things that are so much more profound and so much more impactful in terms of what it really means to get well.
Right? It makes people feel less stuck.
This is Joan. I wonder if you can hear me.
Yes, hi, Joan.
Hi, Joan.
Hello?
Hi, thank you. I wanted to make comments. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
You're gone.
Yeah, it looks like your connection isn't very stable.
Oh, she's muted. She's muted. Unmute her. Yeah.
Okay. I might be muted. What do you think? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. So I was thinking about the words that AA uses, and it said at first there's an allergy, and then it says it's dis-ease. And if we look at what neuroscience is saying right now, and it's saying that it's actually in the amygdala, it increases the endorphins, and people find that they're not thinking so much. And I kind of like the word dis-ease just because of the base, ease, being at peace of mind and being comfortable in one's own skin. And the word dis-ease is one is not comfortable in their own skin. And I think that speaks to me about the principles and the thoughts I'm not comfortable with these thoughts. And I just see it as evolution, just as the creative energy, oops, gotta turn this heater off. The creative, the divine or sacred or, spiritual, whatever one wants to use as this divine mind, it's moving us forward as a community. And I think it's just going to continue to evolve when I no longer go to AA regular closed meetings because I've had a challenge with the words, but I go to open meetings every so often just because I love to see people, and including myself, sharing these opportunities to discover what is this all about, and not running away from these feelings, but going through the walk and through these feelings to whatever understanding. Because I no longer use alcohol in abusive ways, but I just see it as a wonderful three principles is just will probably dovetail into that part of AA that says you will have an understanding, and like Greg said, one will no longer have an affinity towards whatever the addiction is, or an aversion, and there will be no shame because it's just the human experience. And so that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joan. And that really points to something that I really recognized while I was in AA, was that a lot of people traded one addiction for another. They may have stopped drinking, but now they're smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every day and drinking a gallon of coffee and stuff like that. And that was considered to be totally acceptable. And actually, when I was 3 months sober, I quit smoking because I noticed that the people who had stopped smoking and weren't replacing the addictions, I didn't realize that's what it was at the time, but I noticed that the people who had quit smoking and weren't drinking a bunch of coffee were actually happier than the other people. And I stopped smoking, and people actually warned me and said that you shouldn't stop so early. It's going to, yeah, that's what I was getting, is what you were talking about there was really right on. And a lot of times it leads into people just trading one addiction for another. But when you find the actual core cause of the addiction, rather than looking at those symptoms, yes, it affects the amygdala. Yes, if you drink enough, it'll mess with your liver and stuff, but those are symptoms. Those are not causes. Well, to me, what the three principles are pointing at is the cause. It's the actual ultimate cause of the reason why people want to self-medicate, which is that we don't know where our experience of life is actually coming from. We don't know that it is always and only ever from our own thinking. It is not from the circumstances around us. It is not from that guy that cut us off in traffic. We didn't get angry because that person cut us off. We got angry because we had an expectation that nobody was going to. And now suddenly our expectations aren't being met. The expectations are a huge, huge cause of a lot of pain and suffering. And,
It's an important discussion, Greg.
Yeah.
It's important that we really get discussion going.
That's what we're doing
May
here.
I say something?
Patty, did you still have something?
Hi. Well, yeah, I struggle. So I have a meeting that I actually go to every Monday night. It's Three Principles Health Realization. And I really come to love the people there. But we also get in this discussion because many of us are walking both the 12 steps and Three Principles. And just like anything else that I've come to know in the Three Principles is that there is no problem. There is no problem but for my thinking. But for whatever reason, I can just feel like I have to defend the principles over the 12 steps. And I know it's ridiculous. And it's just me going into my own personal ego mind. But also, when I hear some of the folks in the 12 steps talk about some action they're taking, it kind of makes a little bit of sense. And we go from we start talking about Sydney Banks's missing link, going from the form to the formless, letting the form be informed by the formless. And they're all going, huh? What are you talking about? And it just makes more sense to say, stop drinking. Sometimes it just makes more sense. But I also know, like we've just discussed, is that's just the symptom, and it's not the answer. And this beautiful feeling deep down inside will always be the answer. And I can't get to that place when my thinking is spinning around alcohol or chocolate cake or whether or not I meditated today, or did I do my yoga? Did I eat enough vegetables? All of that always just reminds me that I have to go back to that place of peace. And it's so simple. It's ridiculously simple. And I don't know. Sometimes I just want to complicate it. And then when people start going off about the 12 steps in my three principles meeting, I just want to tell them to stop. It's not the answer. But so I'm really glad we're having this discussion. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I know that when I had the realization that it wasn't my sponsor and it wasn't the steps that was keeping me from drinking, because I stopped drinking the second I walked into an AA meeting. I'm like, well, how does that happen? I didn't even go through the 12 steps yet. I was done.
Great.
So yeah, I think there's room for both, but at the end of the day, there's no problem. There just really isn't.
Right.
I think the problem, if I may, Patty, is just, is it Patty? That, a lot of the advice giving and a lot of our judgment, but particularly I think the advice giving is when people really don't understand that they're doing two contradictory things. that really aren't helpful. One is, on the one hand, we know it really does have a lot to do with our thought, at least in the field of psychology that I used to do. We always knew it had a lot to do with thought. But we also thought that it had to do with the circumstances in your life, that you could, we needed to talk about your mother, and we needed to talk about your childhood experience, and we needed to talk about these other things. And I think when we worked with that mixed paradigm, that your experience was coming from both of those things, that's when I got caught up in the trap of trying to give a lot of advice. Oh, well, you need to try this in order to have it, go away, to see it, a shift in what's happening. Oh, well, that didn't work. Well, let's try this then. Now we're going to do this because I just went to this new conference and we're going to try this. So when you're caught up in that misunderstanding, that our feelings have in any way anything to do with the circumstances of our life, I think advice giving is one of the natural outcomes of that, and that's why it never works. It's like pouring water through sand, because you're looking outside yourself for an answer of something that's coming from inside of you, and that can never happen. You'll never find it there. So I've been in the advice giving business for 40 years.
Right.
And I expended a lot of energy giving
right.
advice, and it doesn't work, because until we can see it ourselves, and until we know, what clarifies it is this single understanding of where our experience is coming from. But we got really confused with the whole duality of that both of those might somehow be true.
If I may, can I? Okay, if I talk?
Yes, go for it.
Thanks. I was thinking that most of the struggle, even though it's, dis-ease in the moment, and perhaps one could call it behavior patterns, but I think part of it is just my whole concept of my ego self and what it is to who I am. And instead of going into, living in the moment and feeling whatever this moment and this dance of life is all about, I feel like when I hear someone say something that's different than three principles, like in an AA meeting, I find myself, that's judgment stuff. And every time I go to that judgment of they're right and I'm right and they're wrong, then I have to kind of get myself back into the moment again, because then I'm not really listening deeply, is what I'm thinking. There's something here in this moment that I'm supposed to be really listening to, and I can accept. There's also that element of acceptance. Their story is their story, and they see life so differently than I in this moment. But there's always that underlying truth. I think the underlying truth is people will come in their own way to that spiritual understanding. And then I have to turn around and say, don't be so judgmental to myself, Joan. If I'm struggling with this, it's probably because I've got a lesson here to learn. And I offer that, so yeah.
No, that's great.
Mark has something to say, Greg.
Let me see. Are you unmuted? All right, you're unmuted, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay. Hear me? Yeah. You okay? You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Harry and I last week, in meeting with a group of recovering addicts, had some really interesting input from one lady, and before that, another one I'll refer to. But we were really trying to get to the bottom of, really trying to help these people, and they can really feel it. And I was looking at, I think it was a Cocaine Anonymous brochure that had essentially the same 12 steps, and was talking about defects in character and the disease, which we've talked about, and how that, I was saying to them how you can't possibly have a disease if it's this is a pure spiritual mind that we're part of, and how can there be a disease? that's affecting your connection with your spiritual mind. But the lady mentioned that, she didn't feel it was terribly helpful to be pointing at what the 12 steps had said, even if it was a revision from 1960, 1970, where they brought that disease model in. It wasn't very helpful to be comparing the two. She felt it was a bit off-putting to be comparing different models at all, and that I think she was feeling how much we really wanted to help, and how we were talking about the spiritual, us being spiritual beings, and and Aaron Turner down in South Africa said the same thing. Essentially, was that you can muddle around talking about thinking and the content of thinking and the different concepts, like we were saying. You can talk about that forever and ever, and it seems to never end. But if you turn toward the mind, talking about mind, the source, what is the source? And you start, you're feeling these incredible feelings. You're getting a recognition of that. And we can bypass all these differences. And same with attending a meeting, like Joan was saying, you look beyond, this is all the best people can do, but you don't get caught up in the differences in your mind, and you keep loving and feeling this incredible love. And that was reflected by some of the best success we've had so far in this group. Was a young woman called Megan who said, was so touched by us explaining that we're coming from mind and how we can touch that. We can go beyond our little thinking and touch a bigger mind. She said there is hope. She said there really is hope. And it hadn't occurred to her. She was so touched. So I think that's what we're looking for, is talking about mind, hope, a deeper place, guiding them back. There you go.
Thank you, Mark.
So Barbara, would you say then that ultimately the thing that they both share is that it's a spiritual awakening of some sort that is the cure? Or maybe that's the wrong word, but wouldn't that be kind of core to mental health?
Absolutely. Psychology at its root is the logic of the soul. And a psychologist or a psychotherapist is a caretaker or an attendant of the soul. And psychopathology at its root really means a suffering of the soul. So anything that can point us towards our inward experience, which is, I think, why AA has been as successful as it has been, is that it is really pointing us towards our inward experience. So yes, to answer
you say that it didn't go to AA.
Yes.
Anybody can have a spiritual awakening regardless.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you may have it in a psychotherapy group. You may have it while you're out sailing a boat. That's the point, is that it can,
or waiting at the bus stop or
waiting at the bus stop. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. But when we look inward, when we really look at the inward experience, I think is really where we do discover hope and where we do discover something beyond our own ego framework.
Another way to look at this that came to me recently is that because I heard somebody blaming fast food restaurants for the obesity problems. And it hit me that fast food restaurants are not the problem, they're actually the solution. The problem is that there's not enough people demanding that they offer healthy food. So AA is not a problem. The fellowship is amazing. There's none like it. I don't want to say it cannot, it has not been replicated by anyone else in any other, even the other 12-step programs have not replicated AA's fellowship. So the fellowship itself is a beautiful thing. It's just a matter of starting to shift it toward more of a health model than a disease model, that right there will naturally help more people. But then pointing to the actual cause of our experience of life will make all the difference in the world. even if they never truly understand the three principles, if they just realize that everything that they experience is caused by their own thinking about what they see and hear, that alone would change everything. It did for me, and it has for countless other people. It's amazing how much of a difference that makes. And I couldn't even imagine, the kids who are getting to grow up with this understanding. That's just such an awesome thing. I couldn't imagine going through my entire life knowing this, not being so awkward in junior high school, not being, you know what I mean? Like all of that stuff just gone, just going through life with more ease. It's a beautiful thing. And I look forward, I hope I get to see the day when a good portion of the population has this understanding.
Well, and throughout human history, people recovered from addiction long before AA ever existed. And I think that was
right.
the thing.
That's right. And they found their way through life without psychotherapy too. What a concept.
And people ate without fast food restaurants.
Chris has his hand up first, Greg.
Which Chris?
This Chris.
What's going on?
Well, just everything. I love everything everyone's saying. Remember the war on drugs? Does anybody remember the war on drugs?
Yeah, it's still going on.
I didn't know it stopped.
How's that going? Anyway, there's a demand for drugs. We wouldn't be having this conversation. I wouldn't be having this be part of this conversation if addiction wasn't like, if you want to look at it in terms of a war, if addiction wasn't doing so well. In other words, the society has problems, and the addiction is well, in the news it's epidemic. I assume it truly is epidemic, but I know too many young people that have died within a couple miles of where I'm sitting over the last couple of years. So I think that's why I'm here, because I think that there's more to be done, for lack of a better way of saying it. And the fellowship and the physical interaction with other human beings. I mean, if you could get people together with a common spiritual cause, physically together, and these online webinars are great too, but that's like the one thing AA has going on almost every major street corner in the country and across the world. And Greg and I have talked about this a little bit. I'm starting I'm going to start doing a Inside Out community meetup in my neighborhood or somewhere in Massachusetts in the future, because and to have a dialogue when 12 steps comes up to go, 12 steps are cool, and versus the reason I'm not going to start a dialogue with people that you probably shouldn't call yourself an addict and your addiction is merely an illusion. Also, the meetings I plan on hosting are going to be about anything and start with a reading from a book, and there's not going to be a coach or an authority or a doctor or a therapist or a certified three principles person there, and hopefully we can meet as equals and we'll just see how it goes. But I think there's more place in the community for people in recovery and just the community in general. If I can provide a basement and a church, that's the one model AA love, a free or to almost completely free space to meet monthly for people, anybody who's interested in having conversations based on the inside out perspective on life. That's what I'm going to do.
One of the things, Chris, that when Mark was talking about, when he introduced this this thought about mind and so on, this feeling came into the room, and I felt we had evolved to an insight in the way that it was presented, where we were often, it sort of starts like this, the class, where I'm teaching or someone's teaching, but we evolved to this, where everybody was just talking, and what I was saying was just as a human being, what Mark was saying was as a human being, and then of course what came out of them was very, very, very powerful. And we both, Mark and I, noticed how much we liked that feeling when we stopped this and we were this. And I think there's a little bit of a problem with the doctrine and the book of the three principles that people are teaching, that it does seem to create your state of the art, but you're still not talking about what Sid was talking about, which was the oneness of life. And when Mark brought that into the room, it was very noticeable, the positive effect it had. And one of the ladies says, I'm very sorry for talking so much. And both Mark and I said, oh, no, it was the best part of the whole class, So I just want to emphasize that we're not just talking 3P and AA, we're talking about this oneness feeling with people.
Connection.
A connection. There you go. That's beautiful, Tom. That's right. A connection.
Well, and I was wondering too, doesn't spiritual growth result from the suppression of the ego?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really suppression, because it's the ego's a great tool. It's just a terrible master.
That's a bad word.
We need ego to identify ourselves as me. There is a necessity for it as a human being to have an ego. We can't get rid of it. We can't really suppress it, but we can not let it be in control all the time, if that makes sense. But it's always there. But there is a common misconception that it's like we can get rid of the ego. But that's our identity. If you get rid of your identity, then
the press kind of tamp it down to point me in the right direction and away from me.
It seems to just naturally occur the slower that we get our minds. The more time we spend in a peaceful state, the less the ego is an issue, it seems. That's what I've noticed anyway. It just seems to just naturally occurs. But the more we get caught up in busy thinking and whatnot, then the ego just kicks in.
I find that I take myself a lot less seriously. One of the things that people have asked forever is, why are all those people laughing in AA meetings? The Al-Anon people would go in and say, what are they laughing about? There's nothing funny here, And I think when our egos are in check, in a healthy way, we take it all a lot less seriously. It's just, you just see through it, and a lot more quickly. And you wear it a lot more lightly. I find this understanding helps people to bounce rather than shatter, as life comes along. And in that bouncing, we just have this viability that I think is, very helpful to get through life with a lot less discomfort.
And I find when I look back at how I was when I was severely addicted to alcohol, it was because it was all about me. Everything is about me, and I must not feel bad. And how dare I have to put up with such horribleness? And I can solve the problem with a little more booze here and there. And I try to, not even talk about things anymore. I want to listen, and because it's not about me. It's about directing people to a spiritual awakening, which, I believe I'm having all the time.
Thomas has something to say, Greg.
You are unmuted, Thomas. Go ahead.
Hello. I don't really know if I'm qualified because I don't know so much about the 12 steps. I had a girlfriend who was into it, and she said, it's a wonderful time when I visit, but when I get home and stay with myself, my thinking takes me over. My thoughts take me over. And I said, okay, is it really how you think it works? And then I have to tell you a short story because this was amazing. Because when I realized I'm in the middle of well-being, I'm sitting in it, and like I am not my thoughts, I have my thoughts. So I pay a little bit more attention to life, and I bumped into a car when I parked my car yesterday because I was in a stress because we're going to go to a movie, me and that old girlfriend, and a woman came out and we had to deal with it and stuff, and we were delayed. And when we came into the movie, it's already started, and someone took her seat. So we went out of the movie and started laughing about it. And she said, "Now I really need a drink." Because she was so upset of everything. We were in a stress and everything. So, do you really think you need a drink? Let's see if there's some other film going on. And then actually we were recommended to go to Suburbicon, a new movie. And they really made a mess out of their thinking through the whole movie. And after the movie, she was so quiet. And she really saw that because of everything that happened and the way we've been talking, she really saw for herself that she had her thoughts and she was in control. And I think that's the most powerful thing, to actually realize that you are in control. You can act upon something that you want a good outcome on, instead of, I don't know if it makes sense, but wow, it was great because she was so calm and like saw it for what it was, and it seemed like mind served us all the way through that movie and with that movie, and so much peace in that. Thank you.
That's beautiful. And that is, you know, what do you take on that, Barbara?
I think, I don't know that I have an opinion. I think, you know, for me, I see this everywhere now. I see it everywhere. If I watch a movie, it's like, oh, there it is, there it is. I drove all my friends crazy when I first came back from my intensive. But it's just truth, and we see it. We already know it. That's the key. So many people already know that it is who we are. It is how it is. So, you know, you see it in movies. I see it everywhere I look now. It's just the unifying force behind all of the human experience.
Well, isn't it somewhat shifting your attention?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's about shifting your attention and being mindful that you're thinking. That's what I got out of Tom's story.
I think it's more than that, Tom.
When you actually see that you're more than your senses and your body, what you can experience with your body, and actually have calmness to it, and see that life serves you with, because you're a part of it, then instead of react, you give it a little break to respond to it, and magic things happens all the time. The feeling is more a pointer to that something is going on, and your thought is not as important as you think. Common sense always solves it, sort of.
And that seems to be the essence of, this is what's come to me through this class. It doesn't matter about the differences between AA and 3P. All that matters is the space and the feeling that you come to, that you can share truth with people, where you feel where that connection is there, and that oneness is experienced. That feeling is all that matters. We're just, the differences is just the mental process, and that's freeing for me, because now I don't have to worry about being caught up in the two. I'm just trying to get to a feeling that expresses the wisdom that will help the people.
Well, I'd say this seems like a good spot to wrap it up. You want to do some closing words of wisdom, Barbara?
I think it was a great conversation. I think I expected, I guess my expectation was there was going to be a lot more pushback. So I think I was sort of geared for that. So I was glad to hear that we were able to have a conversation in a way that I think was illuminating. Again, to see that it's really the differences are illusionary when you really see beyond it and you see the one way that experience is created. You know, the rest, as Thomas was saying, is not we are not our thoughts. We are not our addiction. We are so much more than that when we're pointed to our inward experience.
And I guess the last thing I'd like to say is that just to reiterate, the three principles is not against anything. It's not even for anything. The three principles are neutral principles. They're like gravity. Gravity doesn't care if you're walking upright or falling down a flight of stairs. It just does what it does. These principles are working whether you're in AA or if you're in CA or NA or if you're just sitting at a bar getting drunk. Principles are still working. It's an understanding of them that helps change your life. So thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you so much, Barbara, for joining us, and for Chris, Tom, Thomas, Patty, Joan, and Mark for participating today. This was really a great conversation. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody so we can say goodbye and thank you and all that, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thank you, everybody.
Barbara.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.